Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us. We're just going to hold on for maybe a minute or so whilst everyone joins us. I think we'll make a start. So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for our final webinar of the year, which is Burnout, How Do You Manage It? This is a series of expert-led online web and wellbeing sessions, which are available to all medical professionals. For tonight's webinar, we've teamed up with Doctors in Distress Burnout Experts. For anyone who isn't aware of who Doctors in Stress are, they're an independent charity that promotes and protects the mental health of all healthcare workers and prevents suicide in the medical profession. If you would like to know a bit more about them, what I'll do, I'll include a link to their website in the chat. Just before we begin the presentation, I just wanted to go through some housekeeping rules. Just to make you aware that the session will be recorded and uploaded onto our YouTube channel to view at a later date. We invite your comments and questions. Please look at the Q&A chat box on your screen. If you think you have a question for the speakers at any point, just type it in. And what we've done, we set up a voting system. So be able to vote for the question that you would like to be answered. And they will be answered at the Q&A portion of the webinar. Just to remind everyone that this is a safe and respectful environment, so please respect the views and opinions of other colleagues. I will now hand over to our Director of Operations, Stuart, who will briefly tell you a bit about HCSA and the help available to any of our members experiencing burnout.
Good evening, Stuart here, and thank you very much for joining the webinar. And I know from the preparation that's been made that it's going to be a stimulating and very worthwhile occasion. So if you do not know about HCSA, then just to let you know that it's the only professional association and trade union that's focused solely on the needs of hospital doctors and hospital dentists, whatever stage of career they're in, and that includes aspiring hospital doctors and dentists at medical school. You could join us today, and you'll find there's a link in the web. But if you're not sure or you'd like to speak to someone, then by all means get in touch with me at the stage. If you don't belong to a trade union, you don't have any protection, and you're on your own, well, obviously there's Doctors in Distress that will help you, but other things to think about in terms of combating burnout are seeking support from NHS practitioner health, self-referral to occupational health, obviously your GP, requesting a risk assessment and going through that. And then depending upon the impact that burnout is having on you, it may well be appropriate for you to seek reasonable adjustments. I'd advise you to get advice on what is reasonable and pursuing that process. There's degrees of technicality with it. But and there are other issues as well. Flexible working requests can be made, job plan reviews and such like. But that's just a smattering of resources and ways in which this can be addressed. But I think it's time for me to leave now and get on to the most expert people that we've got waiting to speak to you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Stuart. I'd like to now hand over to our burnout experts who will start the presentation, but just before that, they'll just give you a short intro about themselves.
Thank you, Govinda. My name is Dr. Joanna Dilks, and I'm a general adult consultant psychiatrist in Lincoln and clinical associate professor of medical education. Doctors in Distress approached me as a hospital doctor volunteer ambassador with them to put together a webinar on burnout for the HCSA. I collaborated through Doctors in Distress, and we're fortunate enough to have two subject experts, Dr. Claire Ashley and Dr. Ruchi Sharma, to speak with us tonight.
Thank you, Joanna. And over to you, Ruchi.
Hello there. I am really happy to be here, and I am a specialist doctor in ophthalmology. I work in Eastbourne. I would be sharing my experience with burnout. Now I balance between my hospital work, Mondays and Tuesdays, and I work as a clinical hypnotherapist. I had the pleasure of being approached by Dr. Dirks, who is absolutely amazing, and she approached and said, if I would like to contribute my own experience with burnout, and if somebody else could learn from it, or more like identify with it and seek help in time. I am also part of the International Organizational Psychological Medicine, and that's me.
Thanks, Ruchi. I'll just introduce myself now. So I'm Dr. Claire Ashley. I'm a GP, and I'm also a burnout survivor, and I have a particular interest in mental health, mental well-being. I'm very much an advocate for reducing stigma and discussing issues to do with mental well-being, particularly in healthcare workers. I am also an NHS clinical entrepreneur. I have a startup called Bobby Chat, and Bobby is an AI that lives in WhatsApp and helps you to manage your workplace stress more effectively. I'm a Doctors in Distress ambassador. So I joined Doctors in Distress because their values, their goals, their mission is very much in line with my own. I'm very passionate about sharing my own story with burnout and the expertise that I have accumulated in my own burnout journey. So thank you to Ruchi and Joanna for joining me today. I'm going to start the presentation by talking about the definition of burnout, because burnout isn't just feeling stressed at work. It's so much more than that, and it has huge implications for the physical health and the mental health of the person that is burnt out. Now, burnout, when I was a medical student and also in my postgraduate training, I had no idea what burnout was. It wasn't a word that I was familiar with. It had never been taught to me at medical school or in my postgraduate training. And so when it happened to me, I had no idea what was happening. All I knew was that I ended up in a total crisis. Thanks for sharing, Govinda. And that I really desperately needed some help to get me out of it. Burnout wasn't actually recognised or given a definition until 2019, which is when the WHO first recognised it. And the burnout syndrome comprises of three things. And without ticking all of these boxes, you don't technically have burnout. The first component is emotional exhaustion. So that's the fatigue of caring for too much for too long. This typically tends to be the first thing that happens in burnout. And I think particularly for healthcare workers, this is the thing that a lot of us will identify with, particularly with moral injury and compassion fatigue as well. The next part is depersonalization. So this is when you start to develop cynicism and apathy towards your work and towards your relationships with your work colleagues and your patients. And the final component is reduced performance at work in whatever form that takes. So there was a big study that was done and published in the BMJ last year that demonstrated that doctors that are burnt out are more likely to be involved in patient complaints. They're more likely to be named in that, and they're also more likely to be involved in patient mortality and morbidity events. So unfortunately, this is a component of burnout, but that doesn't mean that your burnout is your fault if this is happening to you. So you need all three things to technically have burnout. And burnout is defined as an occupational syndrome that occurs after a period of prolonged and unsuccessfully managed stress at work. It is by definition a workplace problem, and solutions really need to come from the workplace too. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what it looks like in yourself and what it might look like in your colleagues as well. And there are 5 stages into burnout. The first stage is the honeymoon phase. So this is when you are really, really enthusiastic about your work. It's particularly relevant to new jobs or new roles and initiatives, but this can happen at any point in your career. At this stage, there are no signs of burnout. Instead, you're full of enthusiasm, commitment, energy, passion. You're very productive. You take on lots and lots of things, and you really want to perform your best, and you're performing really well, which sounds great. But the risk in this stage is that if you take on too much, that you might end up overworking, and that you might not prioritize strategies to help you to rest and recover. And we know, particularly in healthcare and hospital medicine, that you really do need those strategies in place to stay well. The next stage is onset of stress. And this is when you start to notice that some days are more stressful than others. And this is characterized by three things. So the first one is lack of time for personal needs, seeing your friends and family less, and feeling that your job is the most important thing in your life. And in this stage, you might start to notice the onset of physical symptoms. And burnout is a very, very physical thing to experience. So you might be experiencing things like headaches, stomach pains, anxiety, like change in appetite. So people tend to go one way, like either they overeat or they undereat. And sleep disturbance as well. Actually, the most commonly reported symptom physically in burnout is muscular aches and pains, alongside all of the psychological symptoms such as difficulty focusing and concentrating, that sort of thing. The third stage of burnout is chronic stress, and this is when your stress levels become more frequent, and in this stage, your problem-solving skills and your performance start to really decrease. You might start to feel like you're out of control or powerless. Your productivity decreases. You might find yourself procrastinating as you experience overwhelm. You might start to worry that you're not performing well at your job, and with this comes a huge sense of guilt and failure. In this particular stage as well, like all of your physical symptoms will start to escalate. You might find yourself getting ill more frequently because of the chronic stress. You might not find that you're regulating your emotions quite so well. So things that you would be able to handle prior to this, you might be flying off the handle. So either having like bursting into tears or getting very angry or irritable. At this stage, often there's quite a lot of denial, and you might not realize what's happening to you. But what we know about burnout is that your behavioral changes are clear to other people before they're clear to you. So you might notice your colleagues in this stage, but they might not have that recognition yet that they are in burnout. So you might find that small things might make you aggressive, resentful, really sad, and you're very likely to be denying these problems and distancing yourself from your colleagues in your social life and your loved ones. In extreme cases, some people might turn to self-medication, so alcohol and other substances. Then the fourth stage of burnout is burnout itself. And this is when you reach critical exhaustion levels that really make it hard for you to cope with your demands at work. And the continuous sense of failure and powerlessness eventually give way to kind of despair and disillusionment. You find it very difficult to see a way out, and you probably start to feel indifferent towards your work. And this stage, this is where cynicism and the apathy is the real key emotion here, that depersonalization aspect of burnout. Again, in this stage, lots of physical symptoms, but it's characterized by constant and disproportionate fatigue out of everything else. Then you move on to habitual burnout, that this is the stage when you're unable to recover from it yourself, and what you are experiencing becomes habitualized. So attempts to bring yourself back to normal life are more challenging than ever. Your rest is not restorative in any way, shape or form. And now the burnout is affecting every aspect of your life. It's not just your work, it's pervasive. It's affecting your home life, your social life, all of this sort of stuff. You lose joy in your hobbies that you once loved. You may not feel motivated at all. You might start to feel sad and depressed. And actually, in this stage, clinical depression is very, very common. However, most people during these stages of burnout, they're still turning up to work, and particularly healthcare workers, because we feel a huge responsibility both to our patients, but also to our colleagues, because we all work on, we've all worked on rotas where the staffing levels are critical. And we know that if we don't turn up to work, that our patients are going to suffer, that our colleagues are going to suffer, and we don't want to do that. So most healthcare workers in these stages of burnout go until they hit a crisis point where they physically cannot carry on anymore. And actually the real key to burnout, because it takes on average 1 to 3 years to recover if you end up in burnout, and on average 3.5 months is needed off work, the key really is prevention. So if you notice that you're in any of the earlier stages of burnout, then you've got a really important opportunity there to make some really significant changes and to stop yourself from ending up in burnout. If you do recognise that you're in a crisis, then obviously signposting 999 if it's an emergency or urgent problem. You can always go to Doctors in Distress, Practitioner Health, which Ian mentioned as well. And then we also have a slide next, if you wouldn't mind just flicking on, Govinda, that's it. So these are the distress groups that Doctors in Distress run. We've got a QR code, you can scan that and see if there's anything that's available to you that might be suitable. I'm now going to hand over to Ruchi, who has very kindly agreed to talk about her experiences with burnout. Thank you, Ruchi.
Hey, first of all, Claire, I would have loved to meet you when I was going through the burnout. I don't know how did you come up with those stages. Trust me, it exactly goes in that manner. So what I would like to share is I did not know what burnout was. My only understanding was the final thing you said. You know, I had seen a colleague who had gone off work for 3 months. They were physically unable to cope. And my understanding was this is all burnout is. If that happens, that's the only time you're in burnout. I started to experience burnout so I was waking up 4 o'clock in the morning, just no alarm, nothing, feeling all sweaty. I'll get up, starting to feel like, I'm sick. This happened one Monday, then the next Monday, then the third Monday. So I was asked, well, get yourself checked, what's happening? Muscular pains ensued as well. And I'm thinking, maybe I'm not feeling well. Now, obviously, frequent ill health, you keep going, you keep going. I think as health workers, we are like, no, I'm committed to keep going. I'm not going to give up. I am not a quitter. I'm going to keep going. Continued, and yes, I practically went through those stages. I think I did not reach that one where you have to be like 3 months off work or more than that, because before that, I chose to be a parent. I was on maternity leave. I could actually stand back, look at my life, and I realized what was going on. Is this what I really want? Is this all I want to do with my life? After the maternity leave, I went back. I wanted to go part-time. There was a big sense of guilt around it. I am not good enough a doctor because I am not there all the time. I am not taking up the responsibility of on-calls. I think there was a guilt about even feeling stressed or going through the burnout. Something's wrong with me. Everybody else can do it. Why can't I do it? Something's wrong with me. It took a whole lot of time, journey inwards. I was underperforming at work at the tail end, but the recovery was more about going back to myself rather than putting myself in a box or putting a tick in a box. Who am I? What do I want? And I don't want to fit somewhere, make my job plan, my schedule, my life work for me. I came across this exercise, which kind of was a turning point. I'm not sure where. So it was like, if I only had 30 days left in my life, what would I regret not doing? You would not believe how big the list was. And then I realized, oh, okay, I can't keep going like this. Things changed. I made the decision to go part-time. I wanted to be there as a parent for my little one. Now what I do is I do Mondays and Tuesdays in the hospital. I train to be a clinical hypnotherapist. I do that rest of the week. That is my flexible working hours. I can work in my own time. I can take clients in my own time. A lot of things have improved. My partner, my family feels that I am more patient, more loving, more understanding. So that I hadn't realized that I had changed in my personality, in my personal life as well. But with the changes, I feel like a better person. I have time for myself. All the things that you mentioned about the stages of burnout, I think that should be literally sticking onto every single clinic room of every single hospital. No, this is literally, I'm having goosebumps because nobody tells you that. You go through the whole medical school, you go through, this is wrong, this is the treatment, this is the investigation. How do I take care of myself? If I'm not taking care of myself, I can't take care of somebody else. And as medical professionals, as a healthcare professional, you would keep going till the time you drop, because it's like, no, I'm not doing my job enough. I'm not giving my 100%. So I think it's time to take a step back. And now, next thing, what I'm going to say, I don't know if everybody's going to like it or agree with it, but what I would say is, yes, you might be giving your 100%, doing the best at your job. Tomorrow, if I was to drop dead, somebody else equally capable is going to come in and replace me and possibly do an equally good job within a matter of weeks. So thinking that I am carrying the burden of all the distress for my parents or my colleagues, I think it just weighs you down. It holds you back from being your best self and being your 100% in what you do. We really need to find ways to combat compassion fatigue, which was immense for me. Like at the end of the day, I felt like completely drained. I don't have any, I'll just sit numb, not wanting to speak anything to anyone. So how do we manage compassion fatigue? Putting everything that Claire said, all those slides, at least the center one with the, what happens in each one of it, just creating awareness about it so that, we can identify it in us, in our colleagues. I would really like to recommend a couple of things that, if you're feeling stressed, you're going through burnout, if you're going through compassion fatigue, what can you do for yourself? The simplest thing is try finding 20 minutes of the day for yourself. Not looking at your phone. No, that is not your me time. So these 20 minutes could be anything from deep breathing to meditation to expressive writing. Expressive writing is just a fancy way to say that take a pen to paper and basically take out everything that's going on in your head on paper. We clean the house of trash, isn't it? We don't keep our houses dirty. So the same way, we need to get rid of all the thoughts, past emotions, fatigue, mental fatigue, emotional fatigue that's plaguing you, bringing you down, getting it out of the system. Just 10 minutes of expressive writing literally was almost life-changing for me. So it's cathartic. You don't even have to read it. You don't have to think what you're writing. Just get it out of your system. We keep our houses clean, keep your systems clean. Connections are really important. Colleagues, family. If you're losing on that, you're losing on life. That's not going to come back. So invest in yourself. Even as a medical professional, even if you are giving your 100%, you want to give your 100%, remember to keep your own cup full. If your own cup is not full, you don't have anything to give to anyone, neither your colleague, neither your family, and of course, more importantly, your patients. So yeah, as I said, yes, I wish I knew, but I didn't. So this is, I would say, the summary of what happened. What I would say is, for me, burnout was more of I felt it was atypical because I did not know the steps, because I'm thinking, okay, I did not take 4 months off work, so maybe it was something atypical for me. But now, that is what I was supposed to say before. But now with the better understanding of things, I don't think it was atypical. It kind of progressed very in a serial order, as Claire kindly mentioned. I don't have those muscles pains anymore. I don't get sick frequently anymore. All those things are gone. So I'm just very pleased. And I would completely agree that when I went part-time, I still had this huge sense of guilt that, no, I'm not doing my job right. Oh, this is not the right thing to do. It took a whole lot of convincing, understanding, introspection for myself to decide I chalk out what works for me. My suggestion and recommendation would be align with your own unique strengths, what works for you, rather than looking around, this person can do it, that person can do it, why can't I? Well, they have their strengths and you have yours. So the only person you compare yourself to is yourself. The you from 1 month ago, 6 months ago, 1 year ago, 10 years ago, you are your only comparison. Again, this is another thing that was life-changing, because if you keep, your strengths are different than the person sitting next to you. And that's why we are different. We are not robots. We think differently. We feel differently. So that was another thing. What else would I like to share? Yeah, I think that's the most important thing, that not only in yourself, but identifying if you're working with somebody, if they are going through it, how can you help? How can you identify? Because I couldn't do that. I have been in the NHS for 10 years now, previously full-time, now And I have no shame in saying I had no clue about the stages of burnout. So this was a complete eye-opener for me. And I would love to share it with everybody I work with. Second thing I would like to say is I think this you want to give your 100% to each and every patient. NHS is a wonderful organization, or possibly whatever organization you work for. With COVID and other things, the waiting lists are so long that there's a whole lot of managerial push to get more and more and more patients onto your list, not because they're bad people or they want you to be feeling pressurized, but that's how the system works. So my days were like, I'm starting off the day and I made my life worse with a really long commute on the M25. So I am waking up at 4:30, leaving home at 6:30, not coming back home by 6:30, long days. So you've worked a really hard day. But unfortunately, at the end of the day, I'm not feeling like I have really made a change for anybody or really helped anybody, because I'm so pushed, like I need to finish this list. I need to get this patient out of the room. So the fulfillment bucket was completely empty. I think we need purpose and meaning, most importantly. I still love what I do, but because I do it in the proportion that I can handle, the lists I can manage, I do my laser list, I do my procedure list, and I'm very happy doing that. And training to be a clinical hypnotherapist, I provide life-changing transformations for people that gives me equal sense of fulfillment in what I do. I would not suggest that everybody should go part-time, but I would say find the balance that works for you, whatever feels right for you. So as I said, stay away from ticking all the boxes or fitting into a box. Design your life that works for you, not against you. So yeah, that is what I would like to share. I would like to share a link. If anybody would like to get in touch with me, I am very happy to be in contact. Let me do that. I hope I haven't exceeded my time. Sorry about that. Just a moment.
That's fine. And while you're doing that, Ruth, just wanted to thank you so much for having the courage to share your story. It's so impactful, and I'm sure that it really resonates with a lot of people that have attended here as well, and a lot of good strategies as well. So thank you so much for sharing that. We have got a question for you, but we will answer that, I think, in the Q&A, if that's okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank
and
you.
special thanks to Claire once more. I so hope that I should have met you or what you have to say like long before. But anyways, I'm glad to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We're now going to pass it on to Claire, who's going to go through the 6 workplace factors that cause burnout and how you can start to successfully manage them. Just before we do that, we just wanted to fire up a poll just to get an understanding from the people that have attended today, which factors are most people are experiencing or identifying with presently. So I'm just going to fire up the poll. So if you could just take a moment just to quickly answer that question. Just whilst you're doing that as well, just to mention thank you to everyone who's participating in the chat box. And just a reminder, if you do send a question, we've got the upvoting functionality available. So please do vote for any question that you would like to be answered towards the end of the presentation. We will try to answer as many questions as we can. So we're just waiting for a few people just to answer, but so far Claire looks as though workload is at 47%.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. That's really helpful because I know that we're very limited for time today, so we'll focus on workload and some strategies to manage that.
Yeah, that's right. And just sorry, secondly is control.
Okay, yeah. I did actually, before we start on the 6 workplace factors that cause burnout, I just want to mention something. So Caroline Gannon has said in the comments about how mindfulness really changed her whole outlook and how she gained that sense of control. So control is really, really important in burnout prevention and also managing it when you're recovering as well. And there are 3 predictors of a successful burnout recovery. And it's not taking time off work, it's not leaving medicine. They are getting at least a perceived sense of control over some aspects of your work. Now, in medicine, it can be really difficult to have control over the things that you might want to have control, like the volume of patients, the complexity of the patients, the fact that the rota is not fully staffed, all of that sort of stuff, all out of our control. It's about identifying the things you can control and running with those. That's the first thing. The second thing is good relationships. So having a psychologically safe space to offload is really important, whether you get that with your peers, with other medics, or whether you do that at home with someone who is just there for you. It's a safe space for you to offload. That's really important. Very strong predictor of a successful recovery. And the last thing is believing you're in control of your own well-being. And I think one of the issues in burnout is that it just robs you of your agency, of your autonomy. It destroys your confidence. It ruins your ability to feel like you have any control over any aspect of your life. And getting that back, mindfulness is absolutely one way of doing that, but therapy is definitely the key there, I would say, in terms of regaining that. So I'm going to talk now about the 6 workplace factors that cause burnout. Now, this is work that has been done, like scientific work that has been done basically, that has identified these things. You only need one of these factors to be mismatched or imbalanced in the context of prolonged stress at work in order to be at risk of burning out. First one is control. I've already mentioned that. So control or perceived control is really, really important. And as medics, we're not going to have control over the bigger picture. And so what it is it's about identifying the things that you can control. And if we've got time, I've got an exercise I can share with you about that. The next one is values. So it's really important that you feel like you're valued by your employer. And let's face it, we're medics, right? So we feel valued by the most tiny things. Like we're so pathetically grateful whenever anyone says thank you. We're not in it for the money. We're in it because we want to make a difference to other people's lives. And it takes very little to get this right, which is one of the very frustrating things about working in the NHS. Having the opportunity to do meaningful work is protective against burnout. So as long as the work you're doing is in alignment with your personal values, then that will be protective against burnout. Reward, so feeling rewarded is protective against burnout, and that doesn't necessarily have to be financial. There are other ways that you can be rewarded. So that could be as simple as sharing successes and positive feedback. I think as a profession, we're getting better at giving positive feedback. When I was training, it was like, no one's saying anything to you, you're doing a good job. But I don't think that that's good enough. And particularly now with the pressures that you guys are working under, like, you do need to have that sense of reward. Meaningful work as well does give you some sort of intrinsic reward too. Community, so building a healthy, supportive community at work goes a long way to protecting you against burnout. But conversely, if you're working in a dysfunctional department, if you don't feel like you're safe to raise issues and share your concerns about patient safety or your own mental health and mental well-being, then that will be a risk factor for burnout. Fairness, so equitable treatment of employees is essential for creating a strong anti-burnout culture. So, and it's really important that equitable treatment is visible as well. And there are some groups, marginalized groups, that probably will not feel like they are being treated fairly. And then finally, workload. So the workload really needs to be appropriate for your current capacity, skills, resources, and seniority. And in medicine, with the current state of affairs, this actually is very, very difficult to achieve. So I'm not surprised that workload came top. But workload was first, control was second. So we'll think about workload and how you might be able to manage your workload successfully. And I might invite Ruchi and Joe to add some contributions here. Now, what I would say is, first of all, if you are really burnt out and your ability to do your job is being affected, as medics, we are terrible at turning up to work when we're not physically, emotionally, mentally capable of doing our jobs properly. So that's called presenteeism. So we have a big problem with presenteeism in medicine. But if you are really burnt out, in order to tackle your workload, what you might need to do is to ask for reasonable adjustments or take some time off sick. And that's not running away from your problems. If you're in a crisis, that's what you need to do, unfortunately. You have to have your workload reduced and lean on other people to get that to happen. So you can go to practitioner health, you can go to your GP, you can go to occupational health. If you're a trainee, you can go to your professional support unit, your TPD, all of those sorts of people. What I would say about workload in the NHS is that, productivity hacks will only get you so far, because I think in the NHS that the workload tends to be so overwhelming that any strategy you can put in place on your own might not be enough. So I think it's about just, I think there are two things that you need to do to manage your workload effectively in the NHS. One is be very boundaried about what you can take on if you have that available to you. So you are allowed to say no or to delay things if that's appropriate. Obviously, if a patient is very sick, then you must prioritize that. But there are other things that you might be able to be boundaried about. And also making sure that you're switching off from your work when you get home. And there's a technique called completing the stress cycle. I don't know if you guys have heard of this. It was first described, well, I first read about it in a book called Burnout by the Nagoski sisters. It's a really good book, actually, particularly if you are a woman, because they really lean into the gendered experience of burnout. But it's basically a ritualized act that you do at the end of your workday to separate yourself from your work and to give a signal to your body that it's time to relax. So for myself, I like to go for a walk or do some exercise. I know some people, they like to play really loud music and have a sing along or dance around, might get in the door, have a shower, change their clothes, have a cup of tea. There are lots of different ways you can do it, but if you do it every time that you finish your shift, it's your body signal that your workday is over. So that's not directly tackling your workload, but what it's doing is it's separating your work life from your home life. It's an indirect way of trying to separate that stress. Yeah, so Shazia, the slides are not meant to be advancing at this point. I'm just talking about it. So I don't know, Joanna, Ruchi, have you got, what suggestions have you got for trying to manage workload in the NHS? Govinda, you can stop sharing the slides now, actually. Thank you.
I think the first thing I would say is prioritize what needs to be done only by you, delegate what you can. So that really helps. Your to-do list, what needs to be done, has to be as small as possible so you can be as effective as possible. Trying to take endless things on your plate, unable to say no because a colleague is going to feel bad, is not going to help. Because then you are the one, when you come, that was me. I come back home, I'm completely cranky. Like nobody wants to talk to me. You don't want to be that person, especially to your family. So yeah, I think that really helps, prioritizing. De-stressing works differently for different people. As I said, 20 minutes of the day, I mean, choose what works for you. We all look at our phones, not that, but just go for a 10-minute walk. You know, this, I loved it when you said, you know, signaling your brain that this is the end of the workday. Just do a 2-minute dance or I don't know, just sing out loud. Something that really de-stresses you. So, you know, you are giving yourself the permission to kind of get away from stress and go back to your normal mode of being. What else? Meditation helps me. Mindfulness is really helpful for a lot of people. So maybe even 5 minutes of mindfulness if you could practice. Listening to well, loud music is great, but sometimes just instrumental music, which doesn't even have any words. It's very soothing. It helps all your systems calm down. If you have time for nothing at all, just deep breathe. Just deep breathe for like 2 minutes. I have struggled with anxiety previously in my life, not so much right now. I can give a very simple technique. So if you're in the midst of everything, you know, everything is falling apart, as always, you know, the staff is short, colleagues are short, patients are just overflowing. Just do the 5-5-5 technique, which is deep breathe for 5, hold for 5, release for 5. So it's 5-5-5. So you're just practicing, or you could do 8-8-8. It's like breathe, hold, release. Because whenever we are stressed, when we're anxious, we start shallow breathing, which is not great at all. It's just making the situation worse. So it will only take a minute or two, but you can kind of help yourself ground back rather than feeling completely overwhelmed and out of whack. So yeah, that would be all. Thank you.
Yeah, I just like to add to some of the things you said there, particularly when it comes to tackling workload. And you mentioned delegation. You can say no to things. I'm not talking about like jobs to do with patients. I'm thinking more about all the extra stuff that we take on as medics that we perceive that we have to do, but actually you don't have to do it. I'm thinking like you know, I heard of one colleague who went to their boss and was like, I'm really struggling with work. I don't know that this is the training contract that I want, blah, blah, blah. And they were like, oh, you need to do an audit. Come and do an audit with me. Absolute rubbish. Like, say no to all the unnecessary audits, research projects, quality improvement projects. Like, just do what you need to do to get by, because medics as a group, we are all very high functioning. We're all very conscientious. We care about our patients. You don't necessarily have to do all the extra added bells and whistles. Like, it's enough to be good enough. Like, it's okay to be good enough, basically. And the other thing is, in the literature, there was a very big study that was done in American doctors that showed that doctors that spend 20% of their time doing work that is personally meaningful reduce their burnout risk by 50%. And 20% is that sweet spot. So if you spend more than 20% of your time doing meaningful work, it doesn't affect your burnout risk in any way, shape, or form anymore. So that's just something to think about. Think about what you really enjoy. Like, do you enjoy teaching? Do you enjoy having conversations with your patients? Do you enjoy being in clinic? And whatever it is that you enjoy, can you get a little bit more of it so you're spending 20%? That's the sweet spot of your time doing that. So yeah, the workload might be a disaster in other areas, but that 20% of your time that is spent doing something that you love will really protect you. And you might want to think about going part-time or portfolio career working as well, because it's so hard to manage workload in the NHS. Jo, I don't know if you've got any suggestions for managing workload.
Yeah, I've just been nodding along as you two were speaking, and some of what I'm going to say is a little bit of a repeat, but I think one of the most valuable things I learned, and it was actually during my training, and I found it really hard to do actually. I set it up as an exercise. I had a coach, and it was to ask for what I needed, just within supervision, to have some boundary supervision with my supervisor, because we were always interrupted. And bless him, he was so accommodating once he understood that that's what I needed at that point in time. And it was a wonderful lesson for me to feel a little bit more confident to ask for what I needed. And that became really useful when I became a consultant and things got really pressured. So that's my number one. I think number two, personally for me, and it is personal, isn't it? I'm going to say mindfulness and jogging. That's a part of what I do regularly to help me de-stress and prevent myself getting stressed. Having passions outside of work, so things that you absolutely love that contrast with your working life, that's helpful for me. I too am less than full-time. I do work 4 days a week, not 5, and I value, if I do need to give a bit more time to work that week, that's my choice. I like having ownership of that. You touched on teaching. Well, I'm gonna big smile on my face, because I do teach and I do have a clinical role, and I think they complement each other really nicely as well. So sort of moving between the two helps me feel fresh for each role. The other one is that I have really good friends in the profession, so that if I just need to ring up and talk about something to someone who knows me well, that's open to me, and I find that very helpful. And my final tip is around sleep. If we've had a good night's sleep, everything is so much easier, and it's worth investing time and effort in getting a good sleep pattern for yourself and good sleep hygiene. I know we know all of this, but doing it is hard in real life, isn't it?
Especially as medics, that do as I say, not do as I do. We're terrible for looking after ourselves and prioritizing our needs, I would say. The second thing that was in the poll was control, wasn't it? So having a perceived sense of control is really protective against burnout and also essential in recovery. And the reason why that matters is whilst you might not be able to control like the really big things in the NHS in particular, if you realise that you have agency and autonomy over the smaller things, you're more likely to then make the changes, the behavioural changes that you need to make in order to allow yourself to recover and allow yourself to work in a way that works for you and not the other way around. So that perceived sense of control is about the behaviour change. And if you're not sure how to identify this, then you can do an exercise called the sphere of influence. And I'm just going to do like some seriously dodgy drawing on a piece of paper here. So you draw two circles on a piece of paper like this. In the middle, you write down everything that you can control. And then in the bigger circle is all of your concerns, all of the things you cannot control. And then you concentrate on the things that are in the middle circle, and those are the things that you look to make changes with. So obviously for like working in the NHS, like we already mentioned some of the things you can't control. You can't control the fact that the rota's not staffed properly and that there aren't enough staff. You can't control that your patients are really sick. But there might be some other things that you can identify in your day-to-day work, in your day-to-day life, that you can control and make some small changes, and it's really empowering. I don't know, Ruchi, do you have anything to add to that at all?
I'm just going to say something that I learned from a Mind Valley quest. I don't have anything scientific to back it up, but it really, really, really works wonders for me. So first thing, when I brush my teeth in the morning, I stand in front of the mirror. You look into your own eyes, like, you're looking into the eyes of the person you love the most, and you say, I love you unconditionally. Just every single day. I think when we start off, I've heard from my clients or people like, this is odd. I've never done this. This is so weird. But I think if you just stick to it, it has really worked wonders for me. So you are just being open to self-love and self-acceptance. And I think that is crucial to self-belief. Because I think when we grow up, most of us were told, be nice to other people, be kind to other people, you should talk politely. But how about our inner talk? How about the inner critic? One thing goes wrong in the day and everything goes into a downward spiral. So I think that really helps. And I call it the self-love exercise. So stand in front of the mirror. I love you truly, deeply, and unconditionally. I love and accept all parts of you. And that feels really, really empowering to me, to start a day with that. At the end of the day, again, celebrate your wins. It doesn't have to be something big. Anything, any and everything, celebrating your wins, appreciating yourself for what you do. One thing I would recommend, again, that works for me is a proud list. So a proud list is, again, pen to paper. Every challenge, physical, mental, emotional, professional, any and every challenge that you've overcome in your life in the last 10 years, write it on a piece of paper. And it is just sticking in front of me on my vision board. So on a really trash day when you're like, everything's falling apart, that really helps. And well, I really felt like a superhuman just reading that. Wow, did I do that? Because, we are just so focused about that one thing out of 10 that went wrong and just focusing all our energy on that. So that proud list, like everything, 10 years is a long time. Every obstacle you've overcome, like, did I do that? So I think that is a powerhouse, So, and I really love when Joe said, like, finding your passions outside of work, that's so important. Keeping that going. And I'll remember the 20% rule that you said. That's really wonderful. Yeah. I'm loving being here. I don't know about other people, but I'm loving it. Yeah.
Thank you, Ruchi. Joe, do you have anything to add? Oh, Joe, you're on mute, love.
I don't. Somebody had to do it tonight, didn't they? No, I'm not. I was just smiling to myself and joking that I'm enjoying Ruchi's backdrop. It's very, very calming.
Ruth has said in the comments, change appraisal QI log to a proud list. It makes more sense. I totally agree with this. I have friends who have like little email, like they keep a file on their computer or something like that where they put all of their compliments. I do it on my own e-portfolio. My appraisal is actually next week. So I put all of the good feedback into that so I have it documented. And then if you're having a bad day, go and look at it. It will make you feel better about yourself 100%.
Awesome.
Okay. So I think we're doing all right for time, actually. So I think it's now Q&A time.
Yeah. That's right, and we've had wonderful participation from our audience. We do have some questions. I'm going to start with, this is from an anonymous attendee, just for us all to think about. How to think about poor motivation, to do activities that are likely to be helpful and not just think it's laziness, but the tiredness remains even after we've rested.
Yeah, so I know, actually there's I think when it comes to rest, one of the hardest things, particularly when you're in the thick of it, is to properly rest. And when you're very, very early on in burnout, it's really important that you do just take time to sleep and to nap and to do like only engage in like low cost energy activities, because if you're trying to do too much, if you're anything like me, you will probably have this expectation that your downtime has to be as like productive as your kind of go time. And it's actually really, really important that you take the time to actually rest properly, particularly in the early stages of burnout recovery. When it comes to burnout recovery, there are 6 stages. So the first one is crisis. So that's recognizing that you have a problem. Surprisingly hard to do until you're absolutely in the thick of it and you're experiencing a mental health crisis. The second stage is distancing from work. So this stage is when you need to ideally, physically, emotionally, mentally distance yourself from work. So most people take, in this stage, most people take sick leave if it's available to them. Some people leave their work entirely. However, a lot of people actually continue to work through this, but I would very strongly encourage people to take sick leave if it's available to them, because it will kickstart your recovery, because recovery takes years if you're in full-blown burnout crisis. Then it is just restoration of health. So in the early stages of recovery, you'll be absolutely knackered, absolutely wiped out. You'll barely be able to do anything. So you need to sleep, you need to nap. And then gradually, as you start to recover, you can start to do things that kind of in a graded exposure kind of way. So more higher energy activities. And the data says actually the most productive thing to do to start is to start socializing again, which feels a bit unusual, but that's what you need to do after you've had all of your physical rest, and then some more physical activity. So reintroducing like physical exercise and all of that sort of stuff. Next stage is revision of values. So burnout, like any big major life event, bereavement, divorce, illness, whatever, it changes your values, it changes what's important to you and the principles by which you want to live your life. And it's really important that you go back and you work on this and realize what's changed for you, because every decision that you make to do with your career and your life after your burnout must be in alignment with your new values, because if they're not, you're going to be making decisions based on your previous values. They're not going to work for you in the long run. This is the mistake I made. I didn't realize how important this was. Then the 5th stage of burnout recovery is exploring your career options. So in this stage, people explore lots and lots of options. So at this stage, most people are still off work. You're literally just window shopping for your job. And it's not about committing to a decision. It's just about looking at what's available to you. So, less than full-time working, developing a portfolio career, changing specialties, leaving medicine altogether. There are so many options available to you. Don't do this at this stage too early in burnout recovery, because especially early on, like your decision-making capacity, your energy for decisions is going to be wrecked. So don't do it too early with that stage. And then finally, making a change, which is probably the hardest stage of burnout recovery to get right. Most people take on average 3.5 months off work. Some people it's longer, some people it's less, but you will not be fully recovered when you go back if that's the case, because most people it takes 1 to 3 years to fully recover. And ideally, you might have needed some support from a doctor. About 60% of people with burnout have anxiety and depression alongside it. But also you would very much benefit from a course of therapy as well. So it takes time to do those things, and it takes time to feel the benefits. And the most important thing is to not get angry with yourself at the speed at which it's taking, because it takes so long to feel better. And it's not linear. It doesn't happen like this in a straight line. It goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down, and you will feel sometimes that you're not getting anywhere. So I realized I talked a lot there, but I hope that was helpful. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Claire. I'm just smiling to myself because Lynn Thompson's saying that she's got Ruchi's backlog for real because she's on leave at the moment. Well done, Lynn. We'll all be envious of your fortunate position. Quickly, when I started as a consultant, a senior consultant told me that, we should just have time to stare at the wall if we want to. And I was like, what is this person talking about? I was like, busy mum with young child, all the rest of it. But he comes to mind so much as I've got older, and as I think about giving ourselves the right to not do a productive activity or not do anything at all. Anyway, it's just when you were speaking that came to mind, Claire. Anything from you, Ruchi?
Ruchi, you're on mute.
I would like to thank you, Jo, for having me here. Otherwise, I would have missed out on all of this enlightening information. So thank you so much for getting in touch with me, having me here. And Yeah, when you talked about looking at the wall, again, with the mindfulness, like, we all keep looking at computer screens. So maybe just take your eyes off and look at the wall, or I don't know, out of your window for a few seconds. That could also be, I think, again, it would be a part of mindfulness. So yeah, taking time for yourself. As I feel like saying, you are your biggest asset. Anything and everything you put yourself into, you keep filling your own cup up. You are your best and biggest asset. Keep reminding yourself that. And yeah, that's all I would like to say. Thank you.
Okay, guys, we do have about 11 questions, so I'm going to pick up the pace a bit and see if we can get through them. Thanks again to the wonderful audience who are speaking with us. So, question for Claire about recovery. You mentioned that it takes about 1 to 3 years to recover from full burnout. I'm guessing that recovery might happen in phases or in some kind of stepwise way. Could you please describe what recovery looks like and what signs and symptoms to improve over what timescales, assuming you are in an environment conducive to recovery, and that is, of course, so important.
Yeah, I mean, the timescales are, as I said, on average, 3.5 months off sick, but some people take up to a year, like up to 9.5 a year, 9.5 months a year. And yeah, on average, 1 to 3 years to recover, but it can be quicker than that. Some people, it does take longer. So yeah, that's kind of the timescales. I think the biggest thing to remember if you're going through it is to be compassionate towards yourself, because I think particularly as medics, we like to be problem solvers and we like things to be sorted quickly, but in burnout that doesn't happen. And there's no kind of set defined time period that people spend in each stage of burnout recovery. I mean, I think the thing like revision of values, that's an exercise you just have to do. That doesn't take very long at all, like maybe just a little bit of thinking time. But I wouldn't have any expectations about timeframes. Actually, I'd say let go of that, but you actually have to really let go of any expectations of your recovery when you're in it. Otherwise you'll just get really frustrated.
Okay, thank you. This one's for you, Ruchi. Can you clarify if your training in hypnosis gave you a way through, or did this come later?
Okay, so how it came to me was post my pregnancy, post giving birth to my little one, I ended up with a bad depression, and that made things worse. Anyway, so with the RTT hypnotherapy sessions, that helped me get out of it myself. And that's how I felt called to training in it. So yeah, that's how it started. And yeah.
Thank you, Ruchi. So this one is a general one. How is it possible to realise one's ideal situation or flexible working in the workplace in resource-stricken environments? How can we insist on our design when other colleagues have similar competing needs?
What a question.
Well,
I mean, I think I've got a couple of things to say to this. The first one is echoing what Ruchi said earlier, which is, and it sounds very, very like brutal and frank to say this, but if you die tomorrow, someone will take your place. The system doesn't care. And therefore, the only person that's going to look out for you is yourself. And I think as medics, we find it so hard to give ourselves permission to put our needs first when we're so used to giving to other people. Like it feels really alien. It doesn't feel right to us. But it's okay. You can ask for what you need in a way that is respectful of other people. That is entirely possible. And the other thing is that any improvements that you make to your working conditions will ultimately benefit your colleagues as well. But I know it's a very difficult thing to achieve successfully in the NHS, and it's one of the things that I've had to come to terms with actually in my own burnout recovery is, do I really want to work long term in this environment, and is it good for me? And that's a difficult question to answer.
I'm going to just add a little thing, which is that I suspect people being able to ask what they need is a kind of spectrum. Some people are very good at it, some people aren't so good. But if you need something, and that's going to be helpful to you in terms of you being healthy and well at work, then please find a way to ask for that to the right people. It's very easy to convince ourselves our need is maybe a bit less important than somebody else's, but it's really good to be your own advocate if you can be. So next one. I understand how control matters, but how can perceived control help in any way? It would seem to be potentially very harmful because, one, it isn't real. Two, it seems like the perception of control could lead to blissful, deluded ignorance until reality hits and you discover you were misled or too trusting.
So I think just on the point about perceived control is it's about enabling you to feel like you have the ability to make choices and to bring about change. And that's why perceived control is really important. And I think, I'm not sure that it, in terms of like, okay, it's not real control, but I think you always have control. You always have control, but it might not be over the things that you want it to be. It might not even be over palatable things. It might even be that your control is extremely limited. You know, like sometimes, you know, if you're being asked to do something and you literally have no option but to say yes, it might be that the only control you have is in how you say yes and when you say yes, when really you want to say no, right? But you still have some sort of control there. So I don't think it's about deluding yourself. I think it's about realizing that it's about changing your perspective and just realizing that you do have control over your mental well-being, and it's actually really crucial to be able to do that in order to recover well from burnout.
Thank you, Claire. My next question is for Ruchi. Please, can you repeat those lovely sentences that you say to yourself every day? The ones you say while looking at yourself in the mirror. Thanks. That might actually also be from me as well as the person that wrote it.
Yeah, I would love to, and I would love if every single person would do that, because okay, I'm going to come to the point. So you brush your teeth, and if you've been in love, if you've looked at somebody and said, I love you, that's the way you look at yourself. So the most loved person, you're like, I love you truly, deeply, unconditionally. I love and accept all parts of you truly, deeply, and unconditionally. If you would like to add to that, you can also kind of make a list of, I'm proud of you because, and then you count 5 things quickly. I forgive you because, and you can count 5 things. That sounds like a long thing, but if you make it a habit, it doesn't take more than 4 minutes, 5 minutes. I think a good start would be just looking at yourself and saying that, I love you truly, deeply, and unconditionally. I love and accept all parts of you. So just do that for a week, and then you can add on the other things. I hope that helps.
That's wonderful, Ruchi. So I am thoughtful that we're at 8 o'clock. I know us panelists have agreed to stay until 8:15, but if participants need to get on with their evening, obviously please leave if you need to, please stay if you want to. We will carry on answering some questions for a bit longer and just keep working our way through them. So a question now from Christy. How do you continue in training when you're already less than full time, struggling to pass exams, have already suffered from burnout, have quite severe stress symptoms, and your consultants seem to demand more and more from you?
Christy, I'm really sorry that this is your experience right now. I think you're, like, being totally honest with you, I think you're asking the wrong question. I think what you need to be doing is getting yourself better and then make a decision about your career. Never, ever make a decision in anger about your career, because it's not going to be a good decision for you. And you're basing it on how you're feeling right now, which is obviously quite like stressful and low. I suppose the question is, do you need some time out? Could you benefit from some external help in helping you to make this decision? So if you're currently a trainee, which it sounds like you are, then you can get, I think this is right, I think you can get career coaching through your deanery or your professional support unit. So I would turn to them and get some support from them if I was yourself first, and leave the career decision making until you're in a better place.
Yeah, good advice. So Mandy says, I don't have any questions, but I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your experiences. I'm an RN who now works in HE, teaching student nurses, and have just recently had 3 months sick leave due to full-blown burnout crisis. I'm really pleased you made it here tonight, Mandy. Oh, it's now, I think it's just hopped off my screen, that question now. Sorry, I didn't quite get to finish off reading it out, but yes, thank you for your kind words, Mandy. Is there any information, this is another anonymous attendee, is there any information about whether burnout was experienced previously, or is it a recent phenomenon due to the pressures in general way of life and specifically the NHS?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. It was first described in the scientific literature back in the 1970s by a psychologist called Freudenberger, who observed this phenomenon of burnout in like healthcare workers working in an AIDS clinic in New York at the height of the AIDS crisis. And I think it was a free clinic, so not like people were not privately funded, it was a public service. And as you can well imagine, in that situation, the healthcare workers there were under huge amounts of stress. And then they all started gradually to burn out. And this psychologist was the first person to describe it. Not recognized by the WHO until 2019. It's probably been going on for years and years. We probably just gave it a different name. And people probably just used to cope with it in a different way, you know, back in the day, like probably just went and got drunk down the pub when they got paid, you know. So yeah, it's certainly been going on longer than what's been documented. But I would say we have a better awareness of it now. And it's definitely something that we're talking about more.
Might not be relevant, but I always think about how over time our length of life has got longer as well, hasn't it? So yeah, in the grand scheme of human experience, has that had any influence? But anyway, we have another question from an anonymous attendee. Thanks for describing the sphere of influence. Where would you place things that you could control if only you had the brain space to keep persisting, to keep on addressing unfairness, to keep collecting evidence and presenting solutions? So often things don't get better in the NHS because too many people take the approach that they can't control such things, leaving those who keep trying more vulnerable, which seems perverse when they are often the things that align with core values.
That's such an articulate question. Yeah, there is actually a slightly more complex version of the thing. I don't know if you can see that, where you have three
got an extra circle.
We've got an extra circle now. Yeah, my arts education has not been lost on me. But in the middle circle, so you can vary this exercise. So you can have the things that you can control in the middle, and then the next circle are the things that you can influence. So they might not be things that you can directly control, but you can influence them. And I think that's probably where you would put the stuff that you could only really do if you have the capacity to do it. And then the outside circle is the stuff that you can't control. So I think if you're doing the exercise, that's where you can place those things. But I think when it comes to tackling them, it is about making sure that you have the energy to be able to do it. And, you know, quite often as medics, we take on too much, don't we? So, and there's no shame in kind of going, I've taken on too much and I want to tackle this issue, but at the moment I don't have the capacity to do it. It's absolutely fine to do that.
Thank you, Claire. Now I'm just going to take a step back and go back to Mandy's question that it kind of jumped off my screen and disappeared. So I didn't get to finish it, but our wonderful Govinda has sent me it again. So Mandy was saying, I'll start halfway down. I'm an RN who now works in HE, teaching student nurses, and just recently had 3 months sick leave due to full-blown burnout crisis. And she says, it took me around 5 weeks to be able to speak about work without crying. So that's somebody who's very affected by what we're talking about tonight. And thank you for sharing that with us, Mandy. And I hope that you're finding tonight's event helpful in knowing that you're really, really not on your own. Thank you. So back to some other questions. Okay. How to deal with hostility from the employer about burnout as simply an excuse for what is essentially refusing to cope with systemic failures by saying you are not well, you are entering conflict, which can be existential, there is a mortgage to pay and need to look after children, etc. So you carry on despite knowing well that you are facing burnout.
Yeah, I feel for whoever has asked this question, because, you know, I've certainly experienced that myself. Quite open hostility, actually. My solution was to leave the job ultimately, but I realized that being a GP that I was privileged enough to be able to do that, and not everyone that is attending this webinar will have that privilege. My favorite saying about burnout is if a canary dies in a toxic environment of the mine, you don't need a more resilient canary. Burnout fundamentally is a workplace problem. It's an environment problem. And no wonder that you're feeling awfully burnt out. If you're working in a dysfunctional department, that is what's fueling your burnout. And it's very difficult to deal with it. I think if you can get support from whatever structures and whatever people you have around you. So if you have a TPD, can you go to them? You're an educational supervisor, your union. This is an HCSA webinar, you know, can they support you in tackling some of the issues that you're experiencing? But don't forget that you don't have to shoulder this burden on your own. You have other options available to you. You can think about making changes to your career. You can, you know, if you're in training, then you might rotate around. You might be able to move from that department. You know, there are options available to you, even if you can't go off sick because of paying mortgage and childcare and all this sort of stuff. So don't let them rob you of your control in your agency.
Thank you. Anonymous attendee, is there any relationship with experiencing adverse events or failures?
Yes, burnout is linked with PTSD and adverse childhood events as well.
That's a clear yes to that question. Thank you. A practical one here. It's a great webinar. Thanks. Very sensible stuff from the proud list perspective, taking time to look after self. It's a tick. Will you also provide a certificate for appraisal as well to fulfill work's affinity or excessive paperwork? I might hand that one to Govinda to answer. Not sure if you're able to answer that now, Govinda, at the end. We've got a tick on, we've got ticks coming on that one. Anything from you, Govinda?
No, not from me. We'll take that offline, I think.
Okay. So thank you very much. Just a quick comment that my occupational health department were helpful with empowering me to ask for reasonable work adjustments. So that's a success story, isn't it? Somebody asking for what they needed. That sounds brilliant. This one's a bit of a longer comment. Just a comment: when dealing with toxic management, a possible avenue to anonymously confide, flag bullying and undermining issues would be to approach someone in the local negotiating committee, as you will no doubt not be alone within your department. They will also be able to signpost other support and hopefully change the management approach. Most trusts do have psychologists, and self-referral to OccuHealth can give new perspectives, as well as organisations such as this. Those of us more vulnerable tend to be the more empathic and vulnerable, dedicated people, and we all need to admit our limitations and vulnerability to our directors and managers. Probably all of them will have had their moments. My experience was that at least half of us in my med school reunion had time out for stress, but perhaps most of us don't talk about it. So good to do this now. It's not weakness, but brave, and will help change things if we do so early. So that's some practical advice, and I can see Ruchi clapping. Thank you, Sarah. And then I think this might be our final question. Is there a link between childhood family dysfunction, codependency, and burnout?
Yes, there is. So particularly it's growing up in families where, so any adverse childhood event, yes, primacy for burnout. Also growing up in families where there is a culture of achievement, and where achievement and love, like love is conditional based on your achievement, basically mixed messages about achievement. Unfortunately, that does put you at risk of burnout.
Okay, well, we are at 2014. I think we have got through all the questions that were in the Q&A section. Is there anything from Ruchi or Claire? And then I'll ask the same to Govinda and Stuart.
Well, I got another insight right now when Claire mentioned, like, you know, if you grew up in a family where your parental love is conditioned to your achievement, that was my upbringing. So maybe that was another trigger factor towards burnout. Now, I did not think of that or know that. So that was insightful. I think I have had such golden nuggets from it. And I would make my best effort if I could see any symptoms, like, I would direct them to doctors in distress or to Joanne Claire for more help. And what else would I say? I think I've said everything else. I'm just happy to be here.
Somebody's mentioned there are 12-step programs to address family dysfunction and codependency in our questions. And one more quick one. This will need to be our last one. I'm so sorry, but my experience of attitudes towards being prone to burnout or experiencing poor mental health have been quite critical of my own suitability to work as a doctor. Is this common? Is this a common perception amongst medical professionals, and any advice on how to respond?
So there's been quite a bit of work that shows that doctors and medical students judge other doctors and medical students with mental health problems and believe that it does affect their ability to practice safely. And I think that attitudes are changing. I think that webinars like this are fantastic. Ruchi sharing her personal experience in particular, 10 years ago, that it might not have been safe for her to have done that in the medical profession, because I think there was definitely a huge stigma. I've just left a job working for the University of Bristol, and they are teaching their medical students from day one now, from year one, day one, how important it is to manage their stress and to get help when they need it, and to build supportive communities and all of this sort of stuff. Things are starting to change, and without a shadow of a doubt, I think that there is still a lot of toxicity and stigma within the profession, but we're talking openly. That's the first step to actually bringing about impactful changes. There's another step that might be happening next year where I don't want to get too political, but there's something else that needs to happen. We need a change in leadership to really, hopefully, start turning the wheels in a different direction.
Thanks, Claire. I'm noticing Govinda's call to complete a short survey in the chat. Please do. I can still see there's a really impressive number of people online still. So shall I come to you, Stuart, just for any final words you want to make?
Well, it's mainly to thank the three of you for being so informative. I must admit, it's opened my eyes to a very significant degree, and I'd like to have a very brief discussion afterwards just about some broader issues that might spin out from this. But two issues, and we'll also pick up that point about the certificate, because I'm quite sure that wouldn't be difficult to produce. Thank you.
Okay. And then Govinda.
And just to thank everyone for joining us for tonight's webinar, and we hope you found it very insightful and useful in helping you to manage burnout if you're experiencing it. And also thank you to yourself, Joanne, Claire and Ruchi, for sharing your insight and expertise about burnout. It's been great working with all three of you on this webinar. It's just been very insightful, very impactful, and I just want to say thank you to all of you, and to Susanna in Doctors in Distress as well, that we've all worked together with. I think that completes our webinar, but just to put it to you, Ruchi, Claire and Joanne, if there's anything else you would like to add.
I'm good, thank you.
No, that's great. Well, thank you, everyone, and enjoy your evening. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.